In our last video, you learned how Kamari and I met in a horse production class at Oklahoma State University, and my going out at her invitation to watch her ride, and her wanting me to get bucked off of a young colt that she had, but that didn't happen. To take off from there, one of the jobs, Mr. Berry had offered me a job as an assistant, Mr. Keller. One of my functions was to help Kamari, guess why, uh, with her students and her horses and whatnot. Well, she was taking students off to clinics and whatnot, and it was my job to drive the truck and pull the trailer and help with the students as we came and went. And I had been working there for about a month and a half, 2 months maybe. Yeah, 2 months. And she was taking her students down to the fancy ranch down at Edmond, Oklahoma for a clinic. Colonel Robinson from Colorado Springs, Colorado was the clinician, and he was teaching them all to jump. And I hadn't done any jumping at all. I'd just been there as a handyman. I was riding this young colt. I was riding him to get him broke and handleable because that's what I like to do. And so we had gone down to the fancy clinic. Now it was March the 18th that we were down there, and it was sleeting and raining, kind of really miserable weather. It was probably 37, 38 degrees, and Colonel Robbie had all the students. They were out there going around and around an arena, and he had 6 fences set up down the middle of the arena, all of them one stride apart. And so I'm sitting over in the car watching this, and couldn't hear anything, but I'm there watching. And it was cold. And Kamari came over and tapped on the window, and I rolled it down. And she said, "Lee, could you hold Romeo?" Was a horse that she was riding. He was a saddlebred stallion. And she said, "Could you hold him while I warm up a little bit?" And I said, "Sure." So I get out and I'm standing there holding him. Well, I tapped on her window and I said, "Can I get on him?" I'd ridden him some before. I said, "Can I get on him? I'd like to hear what he's saying out there." And I said, "I'll just go out and join him." She said, "That's fine." So I hopped on him and I'm out there going around with the rest of them. Well, what Colonel Robbie would do is, as he's going around, he'd call somebody out, he'd point at them and have them ride their horses down over these 5 fences, and then he would critique them, and then he'd call on another one. Well, I heard him yell, and I was just listening. I wasn't looking in, and it was obvious he was looking my direction. I turned over and looked, and I did like this, pointing to me. "You want me to do that?" And he said, "Sure." So I turned Romeo. I'd seen Kamari and Romeo go down through that, and that's not a whole lot. The jumping is not a whole lot different than the bucking of a horse, only it's organized and smoother actually. And so I rode him down through there. Well, I'm halfway through, and what I had on to ride, I had a pair of cowboy boots and a pair of wheat jeans. I did not have any English riding equipment, and I hadn't been riding an English saddle, in fact. Anyway, we went down through there. About halfway through, I heard Kamari scream. And so I went on through, and Colonel Robbie, for the next 35 years, used to tell people, says, "I watched him jump his first jump." And because, I'd been a professional horseman since I was the age of 12, breaking horses to rope and to work cattle and just for riding and that sort of thing. And Kamari had been teaching English riding and the finer points of that. Good riding is good riding. Doesn't matter what kind of saddle you're on, it's all the same. Uh, Basically, there's an old saying: you keep a leg on each side and your mind in the middle, and you can ride. But it's more than that. You've heard me say before. The first thing you have to learn to do on a horse is learn to do nothing. When you get good enough to do nothing, you're good enough to do something. And I knew that I didn't know anything, but the jumping was really fun. I enjoyed. I enjoyed that day, and it was that day that I asked her to marry me. We hadn't known each other very long. I'd never held her hand. I'd never kissed her. And the day was over and we're in a stall and we're grooming Romeo. Now he was 16 one hands and Kamari, the top of her head was just below 16 hands. And so I'm on one side and she's on the other and we're grooming. And I said, Kamari, I have a question for you. And I said, I want to ask you to marry me, but there's some conditions with that. I said, if you're not ready and want to say no, that's fine. I'll just disappear out of your life. I go back to college. But I had watched her enough to know that she met all the criteria that I was looking for in a wife. And so when I asked that, her thoughts later, she told me, she said it really surprised her that I hadn't made any romantic advances. We'd never been on a date, you know. Um, but she decided she could always say no, but she didn't want me to disappear out of her life. So she said yes. And that's how we got started. I'll follow this up with some later ones. Know that it's a wonderful tale and thoroughly enjoyed it. Have a wonderful afternoon.